Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at The Colonists, which is a 1 to 4 player epic strategy game where we take the role of colonists building our own communities across 1 to 4 eras. Now, to win the game, you want to have the wealthiest community after your final era. And wealth is determined by a few things mentioned on the scorecard: buildings, embassies, improvements, dollars, and active workers. Now that we know what the winning condition is, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the components, the setup, and how an era works in The Colonists. Now let's take a look at the components for The Colonists. First are the player boards that you see in front of each player. Next are the stewards. Each player is going to get at least one steward of a particular color. And a lot of times I like to give each player a second to leave on their boards so that everyone knows which player is which color. Then we have the workers that are in 3 different colors: red, yellow, and green. And then we have a round indicator that will let you know if you are in the summer or winter of each year. Next are the tiles. You have building tiles, which you want to separate by each building type, like the farms or the factories. You also have resources that you want to separate by each type. And then the tiles that make up the main game board are separated by each era. Next are the cards. Each era has a particular card, and then you have improvement cards that have the era on top, as well as market cards that have the era on top. The embassies have their own building and have their own card, which lets you know how much the embassy costs, as well as what you get for paying that cost. Lastly, we have our resource tracks, which will help us as the game progresses to let us know how much food we may need for our workers as we have more and more buildings covering our player board. Now let's look at the setup for The Colonists. What you see here is the setup for a 2-player game. Each player has their own player board with 2 farms, along with their stewards of a particular color and their resource track cards. You also see that we have the round indicator and the year indicator, as well as the era improvements. And then over on the top right side, you see the Era 1 market cards along with the Era 1 card. You also want to have your building tiles off to one side so that you can reach them, along with your resource tiles. And then you want to make sure that you have your places set up on the main board. This is done by taking the original building tiles minus the day laborer and taking turns placing them one by one. Also, you want to have 2 market tiles placed out so that you can go there as well. Now, the market tiles do have to be at least 2 tiles away from each other. Now, you want to make sure that you've shuffled your Era 1 tiles and then place 3 of them face up. And lastly, you want to choose 4 embassies at random. You also want to give out starting resources by giving each player 6 tools and then a combination of wood and clay to fill your basic storage at the top of your board, and then a food for your warehouse. Now we're ready to begin a game of The Colonists. But before we do, we have one final thing, and that is to determine how many eras we will be playing in this game. Each era consists of 5 years for our communities to grow and develop. So if you play all 4 eras, you will have 20 years for your particular community to grow and develop. Within each one of those years, you're going to see 2 rounds. So we're split into 6 months each. So you have a summer round and a winter round. During each one of those, you'll be sending your steward to take 3 consecutive turns going from place to place and gaining resources, building, upgrading, or improving your community. Now we've decided how many eras we're going to play, so let's begin. First, you flip over the new era card and carry out those actions, making sure to notice that there's a fee on that card if you end up landing on a place that is already occupied by another player's steward. You would end up paying that fee to that particular player as you're going to that place. Next, you would make sure that you place your market cards and your improvement cards and shuffle the tiles if you haven't already done so. And now we're ready to begin a year. So we're starting in the summer round. To start this particular year, you're going to make sure that you flip over a market card, which gives you 3 actions that you could take if you land on a market. Along with that, you'll go ahead and make sure that you flipped over 3 of the era tiles to let you know what particular places will be coming out to the main board in the next year. Once you've done those to start this year, it is ready to begin the round for our stewards. So, to start, you're going to place your steward on whichever market space you prefer, and then you're going to take 3 consecutive moves and carry out those places' actions. So I can move to the Grove and get 2 wood. I could move to the Builder and build a storage shed. And then I could go to the Head Official and get a clay and the first player marker. During one of your 3 consecutive turns, if you needed to go across the main game board, you can move to a market tile for 1 move and action. So you can move across the board and then carry out one of the 3 actions on the market card. If you choose to go to the Diplomat, you can choose one of the embassies and pay those resources to gain that embassy in your community, which will also give you the benefit that you see listed below the resources. Now, most of the actions that you see here are self-explanatory by what you see on the card, but if you ever have a question about any of the actions or what a particular building does, there is an appendix in this game that goes through each and every building, embassy, and place that you have. Once one player has done so, you go to the next player and they carry out their 3 moves and actions. And once that's done, you'll move on to the winter round. And once you finish the winter round, you will start the end of the year. Before we move on to that next year, we do have to carry out some actions. First, we have to check our starting player to make sure it hasn't changed hands. Next, that particular starting player will add the 3 tiles to the main game board. Then, each player can redistribute their workers in their community. After that, we check our balance sheet. When it comes to the resource balance check and resource balance card, you won't really use this until you start seeing yellow and red workers pop up in your community. Because you're going to be having so many of these workers and so many buildings that produce food and other things, you can keep a track on the balance card to let you know if you owe food for your workers or if you have a surplus. And then finally, we do production for our community. When it comes to the production phase, you're going to want to make sure that you understand that you're going to be producing 3 tools, and they will go up here, and you can have as many tools as you want up there as well as your money. And then you're also going to be having different spots on the board, like your hunting lodge would produce food. Now, when it produces, that particular resource can stay on that particular building and is called a buffer. If you want to use them, you have to move it to your storage. And then those particular resources can go from storage to warehouse or back and forth, but every time you produce. You can leave them on the buffer, and if you don't take it off, you won't produce the next time. If you build a storage shed, which would go in one of your 3 squares, then you can carry more goods and resources that you can use to build, upgrade, or improve. If you paid for a building, then on that particular tile it tells you what kind of worker you need to be able to get a production of that resource at the end of the year. Once you carry out your end of year actions, you would go on to the next year and then do the same thing between each year until you finish year 5. At the end of that year, you will start a new era and carry out the same steps that we did at the beginning of the first era. And that will continue till the very end of your last era. And once that takes place, you will go straight into the final scoring that we talked about at the very beginning of the video. And the most wealthy community will win the game.